Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. On behalf of the Alta Group Latin America region and emerging markets, and Invicus EMEA, I welcome you to participate in this webinar, Leasing in the Time of COVID-19. My name is Hans Gijssen, and I'm the regional leader for the Middle East and Africa with Invicus EMEA. I hope all of you, your families, and staff are safe and healthy. Our audience covers 13 different time zones, and in total, we do have participants from 30+ countries. As the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 a pandemic, in over 200 countries, restrictive measures were introduced by the local governments in order to minimize all risks. And according to the IMF, the coronavirus fight is the biggest challenge in the last 100 years. With this webinar, we will give you an overview of the impact of COVID-19 to our businesses. My friends and colleagues, Rafael Castillo Triana, CEO of the Alta Group Latin American region and emerging markets, Ali Diallo, Managing Director, IMEXTRA, and Ian Robertson, Executive Director, Invicus EMEA, will guide you through this presentation, which will take approximately 1.5 hours. After this presentation, we will get back to you and you will have time for questions. The panel will answer your questions as much as possible. Yesterday or this morning, you all received an email from Catherine Forster in which she explained the procedure for this part. I will briefly summarize the procedure. At this moment, you are all on mute. When we will start the Q&A session, the mics will be open for those who have a question. Just use the hand icon at the bottom of your Zoom program screen. You will then be unmuted and can announce your name and ask the question to the panelists. However, there's also the option to write your questions in the Q&A section during the presentation. If it's not possible for us to come up with an immediate answer, we will answer those questions per email. Our panelists are Rafael Castillo Triana, Ali Diallo, Ian Robertson, and Hans Gijssen. This webinar will also be recorded and will be available on YouTube shortly. We will inform you accordingly when it's available. Well, now it's time to start with our presentation, and I wish you all an interesting and useful webinar. Rafael, will you please take it from here?
Thank you, Hans. Well, good afternoon to everyone, and I hope that peace and health are with you. We wish you the best. This webinar actually was inspired by the book and later movie of one of my compatriots, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He wrote a book called Love in the Time of Cholera. And if you have not read the book, I think it's a wonderful story of how pandemics or epidemics could generate good things. This is exactly what we want to do when we call this webinar Leasing in the Time of COVID-19. If I quote a little bit the scientist of evolution, I would say that the consensus is that who survive is not the strongest, is the species that can adapt. And this is the invitation that we are extending to you. We expect that during all this presentation and furthermore in our communication, all the actions have to do with adapting to what the crisis is bringing, not only facing the current crisis, what it lasts, but also the effects that the crisis are going to generate in our future, what many people call the new normal. When the crisis came in, actually, it was a combination of two factors. And these two factors are basically the COVID-19 and the turmoil in oil prices. We're going to refer a little bit about these two factors that are the causal situations that are driving us to where we are. Let me give you a summary about who we are, for those of you that don't know us very well. We are basically a group of consultants that were gathered together, linked by the common experience of having working in leasing companies for many years around the world. The company was founded in 1992 and extended to Europe and emerging markets since 1997. That's when our current colleagues from Invigors started joining us. We have a massive transformation purpose. We want to be the main source of business intelligence for the equipment and capital goods leasing and financing industry worldwide. And we want to convey this kind of business intelligence to you today. We want that through that transference of business intelligence, you could actually contribute to the enhancement of the stock of capital goods and the ability to generate new jobs and welfare to the society at large. This is our mission, and this is what we want you to share with us. Now, when we talk about what's going on, there have been characterized, and we embrace that characterization, as a white swan and a black swan. The meaning of the black swan and white swan duo, if you want, comes from a long-lasting surprise by social scientifics about the fact that during many, many years, the biological sciences believed that swans were only white, until the Dutch, the competitors of Mr. Hans Geissen, discovered Australia, and in Australia, they found a white swan. From there, all unpredictable event that happen and has important consequences is labeled a black swan. And it has created a very interesting theory because in the times of predictive analytics, in the times when we are talking about the ability of gathering data and predict the future, when a black swan comes in, it kind of wakes up to the point that we don't know exactly what we don't know. And at the end of the day, this is very important for us to learn the lesson that even though we make great efforts to predict what is going to happen to us, we need to be prepared to the unpredictable. The predictable side was the fall in oil prices. And you may argue that, and originally it came by a kind of fight between Saudi Arabia and Russia that decided to start a war in flooding the markets with oil. But they didn't count on the effect that the combination of their actions with the pandemic would generate a crisis that goes beyond their abilities. So supposedly, and this is the propaganda that we are receiving today, of course, led by Mr. Trump, supposedly he gather all these gentlemen together, OPEC, Russia, Mexico, some other countries, and say they agree now to stop flooding the market and suspend the oil supply with the expectation that the prices will go up. And they started going up, but they came back. And the main reason why they came back is because the demand caused by COVID-19 is totally down. So while they decided to cut the production in 10 million barrels, the reduction of demand is over 9.5 billion barrels. So the effect of this agreement that was sealed on Sunday is actually very unpredictable, but I would say that in general terms is not generating any difference. So we still are facing the same consequences that we are going to see in some minutes. The black swan is certainly the COVID-19. And it's interesting to see that those of you who participate in our annual conferences, you know that we prepare very much to help everyone to shape their strategy for the next year when we conduct our conferences. And one of the sources of information we use is an interesting study that every year prepares the World Economic Forum. They commit the Zurich Re company and Marsh, the experts in insurance around the world and the experts of risk, to map the risk that we are going to face in the next year. The report for 2020 came on November 2019. And in that report, they of course listed as a potential risk an epidemic or an endemic or something like that, but the probability, according to the report, was extremely low. Well, it was not. In December, 1 month later, we have the emergence of the virus that is labeled SARS-CoV-2. This is the virus. The illness is called COVID-19, but the virus is the SARS-CoV-2. And I think that you all know, because you have been bombarded by information, that this virus was originally detected in Wuhan, which is a large city with 11 million people, in the province of Hubei in China on December 2019. I must confess my ignorance, but I have been several times in China, never went to Wuhan and never knew about the importance of Wuhan. Wuhan used to be the capital of the empire around 1927. So you see how important the city is. But the thing is that apparently the virus came from animals present in a food market. There is currently circulating also a conspiracy theory saying that that was humanly manufactured. We don't have evidence of that, but the fact is that we have the virus, we have the disease, the COVID-19, as labeled by the World Health Organization. And on March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization declared that a pandemic, meaning this is an illness that is susceptible of attacking the entire planet. And you know, we are all affected by this pandemic at this time. This is the latest information we can have, and I suggest that you can follow these two sources of information. Worldometer is a platform that works with artificial intelligence. They gather the whole statistics around the world. This is the latest that I got before we started this webinar. At present, we have more than 2 million cases. And you can see that we have roughly 1.4 million cases that are still active. And we have 600 and something cases that are already closed. Out of there, only a 79% has been recovered, and 21% is dead. The other source of information, which is the summit of the scientific communities, the Johns Hopkins University map. They show exactly how the pandemic is growing, and you see also how the curves show that we are far from over. This is going up, and the world needs to be still prepared for the impact of the COVID-19. What was the reaction that was taken? This is, of course, a map that has already been overridden because what has happened is that most of the countries decided to impose lockdowns, mandatory quarantines. I personally have been in quarantine before March 11, but not by obligation. I still don't have the full obligation. But you can see the countries in red are these countries that decided to fully close themselves. And the countries in orange are those that are in partial closure. The gray countries are those that didn't consider at that time the importance of a lockdown, and that left open to the free decision of the people. But certainly that is driving a drastic reduction in economic activity. And certainly this is one of the main issues that we are going to analyze today. Let's talk a little bit about that. The International Monetary Fund, and actually they produced a report that was published just early this morning, which is not very optimistic, but in what concerns to the region that we are looking after, which is the Middle East and Africa, clearly the basic points that they show is that this pandemic is generating impact in healthcare systems, which has special gravity in the conflict-torn states. We are talking about Iraq, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Second, falling consumer confidence, which means less economic activity, less trade, drop in domestic and external demand. I mean, the main exports are not finding a purchaser nowadays. And of course, this is creating a disruption of production in all our countries. In addition to that, you can see how the volatility and the spreads of in connection with the perception of risk in our countries is currently going up, which means we are going to have difficulty to get funding in the coming future. We are going to talk a little bit about funding. And if we get funding, this is going to be more expensive than in the past. Now, in terms of the oil effects, certainly oil exporters are currently facing the additional shock of plummeting oil prices. And clearly, even though this agreement has been reached, it's clear that the countries are exporting less oil and the prices are not good as well. Then there is a second effect that is very, very impacting in several countries that live out of tourism and hospitality, like Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and others that attract a lot of tourists during the years. Now tourism is not going to be what it used to be in the past. Commodity prices are going down, which means what we export, we are going to receive less money than we received in the past. And of course, the global risk aversion forecast means, at least the calculation made by the International Monetary Fund, is that the Middle East and Africa are going to lose $2 billion in new funds that were in a way scheduled to come into the country. So we have volatility, we have reduction in liquidity, and we have reduction in the prices of what we sell. What is the impact that this is creating to lessors and to equipment financing companies at large? This is what we are going to discuss the rest of this webinar. Over the years, we at the Alte Group and in Vigors, we have been learning from our contact and our own experience leading equipment leasing and financing companies. And we came to the conclusion that there are 10 drivers or 10 pillars of value. You generate value through these 10 pillars. The first one is strategy, which means if you don't have a clear direction where your business must go, then you are like the spider that has a web, and whatever insect falls there is going to be a business. You will not get too far if you have this kind of lack of strategy. So strategy is one of the main pillars, is very important, and we have been working many years with our clients in this field. The second one is pretty obvious. I mean, if you don't have the ability to buy equipment and capital goods to lease or finance to your clients, certainly you are not going to have a business. So you should have an engine of new business originations in place. And that's the second pillar without any doubt. The third one, of course, is also pretty obvious. I mean, if you get the business but you don't have the money to pay for the equipment you are buying or you are planning to finance, or the real estate that you are financing to your customers, then certainly you don't have a business. So funding is a critical piece of your creation of value. Pricing is another important pillar, because even if you have business, if you have funding, but you don't know how you make profits, how you need to price it, so probably you are doing business, but you are losing money. So pricing is a very important engine as well. Equipment and asset management, certainly in our business, are very important. Not only as a protective measure, we need to really protect our investment in equipment and assets, but also because it is also a source of additional income, of additional revenue, if we know how to manage that. Because you can make profits at the end of the lease or after the repossession of an asset if you know exactly how the asset behaves in the markets, in the corresponding markets. Credit risk management is certainly one of the key areas, because you can lose all your investment if you deploy to the wrong clients in the wrong way your investments. So credit risk management is a key area of value. Productivity is another one. How can you extract more value from the resources, especially the human resources you have? So having a focus on productivity is key to generate value. Technology is certainly another one. We are going to talk a little bit more about technology, but technology is an area where you can multiply your value if you do the right thing and use the right technology. Innovation is another source of value because if you innovate, you can differentiate yourself from your competition and make more value. And tax planning has an important effect, which is once you are able to create value, you need to consider that you need to contribute to society, you need to pay taxes, and you need to do that in the right way. We have seen that many companies ignore the importance of tax planning, and they end up paying more than they should in terms of their taxes and contributions to society. So these are the 10 pillars, and how these 10 pillars are going to be impacted. We see that the most relevant that are impacted by and after the COVID-19 are these pillars: strategy, technology, productivity, credit risk management, new business originations, and funding. And that's what we are going to talk about in the next few minutes. Let's talk first about strategy. If you play card games, you see that, well, you need to get the card deck in order again. And quite frankly, if you make a plan for 2020, whatever you plan before the COVID-19 now is useless. So at this moment, we need to start a new strategy. We need to change totally. And here we have some important suggestions. This is an interesting information that we received from an organization called CEO Coaching. They organize another webinar, and I like very much this slide because it summarizes what we should do as leaders. By the way, when I saw the list of attendees, I saw you, I could see that all of you are in a leading position. So everything that is in this slide applies to you. And the first suggestion in this crisis is you must lead, which means you must not fall into panic. You must keep steady at the wheel. You are guiding your organization. You are driving your organization. You need to be steady at the wheel. The second suggestion is that in these times, cash is king. So you need to try to keep and accumulate as much liquidity as you can. We are going to talk a little bit that in that connection because that is going to impact not only credit risk management, but also funding. The third point is a little bit painful, which is if you need to cut something, if you have some kind of grease in your organization that you need to anticipate that your business turnover is going to be reduced. So if you need to cut something, you better cut it now. It's going to be painful, but you need to do that. The next suggestion is very important. You must stay close to your key relationships, being your vendors, being your customers, being your financial institutions, your funding sources. Keep close to them. You are going to need them. Next suggestion is don't stop marketing. I mean, the fact that you are compelled to be in a forced quarantine and lockdowns should not stop you to be in touch and keep being relevant to the rest of your stakeholders in your business. The next one, which is basically the message of this webinar, is that there is opportunity in adversity. So let's try to grab the opportunities that adversity are bringing to us. Next suggestion is focus on what you can control. I mean, there are many things that you can control. You cannot control the time of the lockdowns. I mean, you can see that in many countries, the lockdown has been extended, and we don't know exactly when this is over. So you cannot control that. But there are other areas that you can control, and we are going to talk a little bit about that. You can control how you manage your credit risk. You can control how you use technology, and you can control how you manage your assets. Next, of course, in this area, when we have uncertainty coming from all sides, don't take asymmetric or deadline risk. Be cautious. Of course, you need to take risk, otherwise you wouldn't be in business, but be conservative as you can. Have your advisors challenge your assumptions, and this is a role that we happily provide. We help you to challenge your assumptions. We are constantly gathering business intelligence to see if if your decisions could be sound or not in the current situation. And overall, keep a good attitude. If you keep a good attitude, everything is going to work well. It's challenging, of course, but keeping a good attitude is the key for everything else. So how do we see the new priorities for the equipment leasing and financing companies? We see three basic things. Number one, the pandemic is bringing an opportunity to equip the healthcare sector in order to tackle the pandemic and become more sustainable towards the future. We have seen in our clients that they don't pay too much attention to the healthcare financing. Never represents more than 10% of the portfolio, even in the companies that are more active in healthcare financing. Now, I think that we have an opportunity, a great opportunity to not only increase our portfolio there, but also become relevant and become part of the solution. We believe that if you do that, you are going to multiply the purchasing power of all the funds that are currently deployed to solve the pandemic crisis. The second opportunity is to recompose the supply chains. Supply chains are disrupted. And that means that many of our clients don't receive the raw materials on time, or they don't receive them at all. Transportation of goods and all the logistics have been also impaired. So at this moment of time, it's a good time to recompose supply chains. That is a good opportunity for us in terms of helping our clients to recompose the supply chain. And the third one, which is very important, is we need to work in the re-engineering of the capital goods used by our countries. Again, there is a high dependence currently today of using capital goods, which are basically imported, probably large items, very expensive. To name an example, food factories that are necessary today to feed the population, well, they are expensive to bring into the table. Now there are new technologies that enable us to produce food in a much more efficient way, and we as lessors and equipment financing providers can make a difference in connection with that. So let's start talking a little bit about equipping the healthcare sector. Important to mention, this is currently supported by respective governments, and in the case of the Middle East and Africa, is also supported by international organizations. Well, the first point that the pandemic has taught us is that the first measure we need to apply is washing our hands very often, because it is clear that the virus dies with the effect of soap and water, or at least not the virus in itself, but the spike that is part of the virus, which is the part that attacks the body, basically loses its power to harm if we wash our hands. And here we have to face a situation. Most of the countries, especially in Africa, don't have enough infrastructure of water supplies. So probably the first area where we need to invest and look for solutions is in supplying water. You can see this is a typical example of what we find in Africa. This here is a very interesting lesson that Rwanda has given to us. Rwanda has put some washing hand places in the bus station. So people, before getting into the bus, are forced to wash their hands. That's happening in Kigali nowadays. But you can see in the right, and I'm sorry if you can see, cannot see that very well, but we are talking about very low penetration of water supplies. If we take the case of Tanzania and Kenya, for example, we are talking about 60 to 61% of the population having access to clean water. So clearly there is a gap, and we should have the ability to work in financing water treatment processes, financing the supply chain of water, including trucks transporting water and tanks and everything else. So I think that we can do a lot to help that. By the way, the World Bank has a special program working for that, and probably this is something that I will ask our friends from the IFC who are present in this webinar to help us a little bit out this kind of information. What is the hardware that is required today to combat the pandemic? And you can see, probably you have read a lot about them. These are test kits, number one, mask to prevent the contagion, intensive care units, which are necessary to improve the capacity of the hospitals to attend the increasing number of patients, ventilators, protecting gear, especially to the healthcare people. We have seen the sad news that many doctors and nurses have died victim of the COVID-19 illness, which is something that it shouldn't happen. But sometimes it happens because they lack the protecting gear. Now, let me, I'm pretty sure that you have read a lot about the technical aspects, but I would like to share with you something that is very relevant for me to understand the whole process. You can see the effect of the COVID-19 in the population. And I'm sorry if the image is a little bit blurred, but we are talking in the top that 30% of the population has no symptoms. The way it works is that in the first 5 days, after you contracted the virus and you don't know that, you don't have any symptoms. Then the system, you never have symptoms because your immune system defeats the virus. And that part of the population, that 30% of the population that is asymptomatic, they already defeated the virus, but we never know when they did that. The second part of the population represents 35% of the whole total population. Sorry, 55% of the total population. This is the population that receives or gets mild and moderate symptoms. I mean, they receive the virus. In the first 5 days, they don't have any symptom. Then in the next 5 days, they start to experience mild symptoms. That happened, for example, to Prince Charles of England. But the immune system defeated the virus, and then all these patients are, there's no death in that group. They are simply cured without the intervention of any hospital. But these two groups will be very well served if there are test systems available. Then we have the two saddest group, which is a 10% that receive severe symptoms. They need to go into the hospital. That was the case of the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But finally, with the help of the hospitals, the drugs and everything else, the immune system gets to defeat the virus. Out of this group, there is unfortunately a 15% of cases of death. But in general, the majority gets healed. And finally, we have the group that is a 5% of the population, have the same behavior. At the beginning, they have no symptoms. They have 3 more days with mild symptoms. Then they get into intensive care units with a respirator and so on. Unfortunately, 50% of that population dies, and the other 50% gets recovered. So looking at that, it gives us a very good idea of what can be done. And this is very interesting. We conducted the first webinar of this kind for Latin America in Spanish. And one of the officers of Philips said, "You didn't mention Philips in your webinar." And I answered him, "Yes, I didn't mention because I didn't know you have anything for the treatment." So he sent me these slides that are very illustrative. And he said, we have 2 things. One is for the testing process. Philips can really help very much for this kind of equipment. And then for the treatment process, we can have equipment that helps patients with mild, severe, and critical illnesses. That means that there is equipment available that we can finance to help solving the pandemic. Let's look, for example, in the testing side. In the testing side, there are 3 technologies that are being used. The most widely used is the one in the center, the PCR test. These are the tests that are currently used, are probably the most reliable, but they are not accessible to everyone. And even with that, you may have read the case of the Chinese test system, the PCR test that were sent by China to Italy. Unfortunately, 40% of the kits were defective. They gave either false negatives or false positives, didn't help too much. The second technology that is being used is serology. Serology is a technology that basically, you punch your finger, you get a drop of your blood, goes into that test system. Is like a pregnancy test, and there is a reactive liquid that shows whether or not your body developed antibodies for the COVID, for the SARS virus, for the COVID-19 virus. This system is not totally reliable, but it covers much more people, and this is one of the things that is certainly available. And if you get back to the graphic in the last slide, you can see that it could be very, very useful, especially with that part of the population that already had the virus and the immune system has defeated that. And then we have the technology using by an application, digital contact tracing. Currently, the Chinese, they basically made this application through Alibaba and became mandatory in China. You can see that in the screen, the barcode or the QR has a green color. Actually, the system detects not only your symptoms, your body temperature, but also, and that's through your smartphone, but also where are you located and whether or not you have contagious people around you. With that, the system is going to give you a green color, a yellow color, or a red color. All the citizens are forced currently in Wuhan to show that when they go to a train station, when they go to a bus, when they go to a public building, and if the system is yellow or red, they get denied their access. They need to go back home and get some quarantine time. If they are in green, they can circulate freely. So this is the kind of contribution of technology for the testing process. And of course, we can finance that kind of technology. We can finance ventilators, and this is a sample of the main suppliers of ventilators around the world. ResMed, GE Healthcare, Hillrom, Getinge, Draeger, and so on. These could be your business partners if you want to get into the business. Clearly, if you talk to them today, they will tell you we are overwhelmed. Our production capacity is not enough, but they are working extra time. They are currently developing joint ventures with other kind of factories. You have seen that Ford Motor Credit Company is actually working with GE Healthcare for production of more ventilators. General Motors has another joint venture in place. So the manufacturing of ventilators is something that is moving very, very hard. And providing this kind of financing is going to be very useful if you can offer that. So a part of the support that we can give to the healthcare system, let's see what we can do in recomposing supply chains. And the starting point is to review what are the industries that have been more affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Moody's produced this interesting analysis, and you can see that in red, they have the high exposure industries, like is not the lodging system, hospitality, hotels, passenger airlines, retail, which is not related with food, global shipping, and so on, the auto industry. They have here hit very hard by the crisis. And of course, they will need to recompose their supply chain. They will need to recompose their business. Then we have the moderate exposure, which is the orange one. And then there you have chemicals, beverages, protein and agriculture, service companies, steel producers. They have a moderate impact here. They can really survive. They need a lot of restructuring. With low exposure, we have construction materials, defense, the rental business, packaging, real estate, food, and food retail, because of course, everyone is needing to eat right now. And of course, there are winners. The Amazon.coms, I mean, the Amazon is creating 100,000 jobs where we speak, of people to deliver goods to the houses, because everyone is ordering through Amazon. The internet service companies, I mean, we are conducting this webinar We are using Zoom, which has been very debated, but this is a company that has boomed during this COVID crisis. Gold mining, certainly gold is going to go up. After the pandemic, after the crisis goes, there is no doubt that gold mining is going to be up. So this shows you exactly who are the winners and who are the losers, and certainly is going to lead you to the issue of how to recompose supply chains. McKinsey produced a very interesting white paper, which, by the way, will be available to you if you ask. Be kind, just send me an email and I will be happy to share that with you. But it is very important for us because it's going to guide our actions in two fronts. One is with new customers, with the customers that we want to originate new deals. And the second one is with existing customers in order to help them go through the crisis and probably work on a workout or restructure situation. And what this is suggesting is that we need to sit down with the client and analyze where the supply, the suppliers and the distribution comes from. So we need to understand that a company, one of our clients, they have a tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. And we need to understand also that they have a distribution center, they have customers, and they have customers of customers. So it is important in order to the final point, which is the ability for them to generate more cash flow, that we can help them to recompose all these areas of supply chain. This is a very interesting exercise. It's a unique exercise. We certainly can help you in shaping that with your customers, but I encourage you to do that because that's the only way that you can really manage your business in a sustainable way. Now, when we talk about reengineering of the country's capital goods, the first realization we had, especially when the crisis came and China was locked to the rest of the world, we came to the realization that emerging markets depend very highly on supply coming from China. And at that moment of time, we were concerned, what happens if we don't have the raw materials from China? China supposedly is back on business slowly, but we need to learn the lesson and say we should be able to have a plan B, an alternative to whatever China supplies to us. And that brings us to the reflection that in this kind of crisis, the Maslow pyramid comes to mind. Maybe you are familiar with the work of the psychologist Abraham Maslow, but Maslow, what he did is that he put in order the priorities of the needs, of the human needs. And what happens in this kind of crisis is that the three first layers of needs become more relevant. And these are basic physiological, like food, like healthcare, shelter, and so on. Safety and security, and love and belonging. You know, it's just how can you manage to survive your quarantine without hating your spouse and anything else. So you need to really satisfy this kind of three needs, and you need to be able to produce that at home. Let me give you some example later on. This is an interesting reflection that we received from Boston Consulting, and is showing a little bit how life is going to be changing after this crisis. Because what we are learning today is going to show that there are certain priorities that change. So you can see in dark green the activities that are going to increase, or the behavior are going to increase. And certainly one of them will be working from home. We are going to talk a little bit more about that. And that will certainly trigger the need of home office spaces, refurbishment. So furniture is going to be one of the assets that we probably need to finance. Equipment, especially information technology equipment, is something that we need to also provide. While at the same time, offices and commercial real estate are going a little bit down. Probably this is not going to be a hot sector in the future once people learn that they can be more efficient working from home. Eating at home as well is going to affect the restaurant industry, but the food delivery, the e-payments industry, the delivery services, we talk about Amazon already, the takeaways, this is going to grow, and these are areas of financing that are going to be very interesting. In entertainment, so we have streaming. Again, technology is going to work very much. Books and games. And of course, going to theaters and something is going to be down. Going to the stadiums to watch the soccer game or the football game is going to be challenging. Travel is going down, certainly. And digital coordination is going up, which is exactly what we are doing at this time. We are coordinating. You are currently 55 people talking to us or listening to us. And this requires, of course, investment in connectivity equipment, the Huawei and Cisco kind of equipment, software, and so on. So here we have a lot of interesting opportunities on how life is going to see. So what is going to happen now if we need to re-engineer our capital goods? Well, in the past, and this is an interesting evolution of how manufacturing has changed over the years. We started at the end of the 19th century with craft production, and then in the early 20th century, mass production. You remember the tea car, and when mass production reaches maturity, we went into mass customization. But now we have mass individualization, and the main driver for that is the launching of the 3D printers, what is called additive manufacturing. So if we finance 3D printers, we will be able to provide our clients the ability to manufacture certain goods, for example, furniture, and even we can manufacture food using 3D printers. So this is a very interesting area that is interesting to look at. Let's talk about productivity, which is one of the areas of value. If you see this young guy, you see that he's not in a conference call, he's playing video games. And you can imagine that if you send your employee back home, you can really not know how to extract the maximum value of your staff when you have them remotely. So that drives important actions. The first one is that you need to improve your communication means. You need to plan, and to communicate the plan also means you need to take decisions, act, and repeat this behavior on a continuous basis. So you need really to have a very good communication with your remote employees. And here's the challenge. What we are facing today is the following, and this was sleeping, but is now more apparent when we have this COVID-19 crisis. Gallup undertook a study some years ago showing that globally, on average, only 13 of each 100 employees are really committed to their work. The rest of the people, the 87 remaining, they just go to the office and collect their payroll, but they don't really have any commitment. They don't love what they do. And of course, when you take them home, it's clearly that those that don't love their job are going to be productive nothing. So some years ago, the School of the Blue Ocean Strategy, which is led by some professors of the University of INSEAD in Paris, they started facing the problem, and they say, well, the issue here is that if you want to really put into play the talents of your people, you need to have leadership. And leadership is not only at the top level. Leadership also works at the medium level and at the level of the subordinates that are in the front office, those who are in front of your customers. So in our industry, we talk about front office, middle office, and back office. I would say, and of course, top management. I would say that middle office and back office are this class of medium level employees. Front office are certainly the subordinates. And in all of them, we need to really inject some leadership. So, and this is absolutely necessary, imperative when you are in a remote working mode, because you are not able to really go after and breath on the neck of your employee, because your employee is going to be far away. You don't know exactly what your employee is doing. So the exercise that is suggested, and we really encourage you to do that, to the point that we also offer you to serve as a kind of independent mediator, if you want, is that you really need to question yourself, your practices of leadership. And the suggestion that the Blue Ocean Leadership makes is that while it is important to talk about the values and styles, the most important thing to focus is about acts and activities. How do the leaders spend their time? In which kind of activities? Which are the activities that are productive? Which are the activities that really don't add too much value? And the most important part of that is that you need to treat the leadership as a service that you sell to the rest of your organization. In the case of the frontline management, they sell their leadership to the customers. But today, what you see in red here is what they do today. The frontline management, they work to please the boss. The middle managers, they work to control and play safe. They play politics, and they don't care actually about what they really should do, which is encourage and empower the frontline employees. The top management, they focus on the day-to-day operations. They ask for reports. They organize long conference calls that generally are not productive, but they don't really delegate and chart the company's future. They should say, this is the direction, this is what you need to do, and that should be transmitted to the middle management that should not only empower, but also coach and give freedom to the front line, so the front line acting what they need to do, which is keeping the customers happy. And in order to get there, you need to start again in reviewing your practices and see how you can really manage that. The key here is that your leadership must be bought by the rest of the organization. And this is the most important part, because if you tell yourself the truth, sometimes your leadership is not bought by the rest of your colleagues in your organization. So what the Blue Ocean Leadership suggests is that you should analyze your leadership reality, develop alternative leadership profiles, select the to-be leadership profiles, I mean, how the leadership should change, and institutionalize the new leadership practices. And this needs to be made now, because otherwise the remote work is not going to really generate value. So that will mean that you need to eliminate certain acts and activities. You need to erase others that are not currently widely used or widely practiced. You need to reduce activities where you are investing too much time and you are not gaining too much traction with the rest of your organization or your customers. And you should create some other activities that you are not doing today and probably are going to make a difference in terms of how can you use the talents of your people. So here are two key words: leadership and talent. If you are able to have a leadership that you can sell to the rest of the organization, that will unveil the talent that your people has, and then productivity is going to be up. So having said this, I would like to transfer the microphone to our friend Jan Robertson. Jan produced a very interesting article that was published in several leasing publications, and it's a practical map of what you need to do in this time of crisis. So Jan, if you are so kind, please guide me to move the slides and address the audience.
Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you very much, Rafael, for the introduction. And yeah, as Hans and Rafael did at the start of their sections, let me just extend my very best wishes to everybody and your families and loved ones in these difficult times. As Rafael said, I've got a very short section kind of bringing things maybe a little bit down to the more operational level of how to react in the crisis. And Rafael, you can perhaps move to the next slide, which is a very simplistic map of not all the key processes, but many of the key business processes that perhaps need to change from, let's say, the existing steady state environment which you've been operating in over the last few years, and migrating to, let's just say, an adaptive mode, to use the phrase that Rafael used earlier. You know, the agility of your business to move from, you know, one mode to the other is of utmost important at the moment. And I would guess we see in a lot of our clients the move on the commercial activity, so the move away from the commercial activity very quickly to the block at the bottom of the page, restructuring customer payments and really dealing with immediate needs of clients, is probably a transition that most, if not all of you, will have already taken. Similarly, the blocks on business continuity, I think, are fairly obvious. That you know, these business continuity plans are things that perhaps have been sitting in drawers or not being given great attention in the normal course of business, and when you come to need them, these are plans that I'm sure you've already put into force or have you know, adapted and evolved. Rafael already talked a little bit in passing about credit decisioning, and I think that's a fairly obvious area that focus on the front end of business and maintaining high quality new business is a critical area. But some of the areas that we haven't addressed so much in passing so far around the assets related specific aspects, getting to know the aspects of what really have you got in your portfolio, and what are the implications of actually the business model that you might have, how you go about partnering with people, and how you dispose of equipment, whether that's from default or whether you have any operating lease assets in your books where you actually physically need to dispose of equipment at end of lease. These are some of the topics that we'll get to in the next few minutes. It's, as I said, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's just meant to be illustrative of the shift from, let's say, business in conventional times into the times that we're facing today. So Rafael, perhaps you can move to the next slide. Yeah, so I'm not going to read through all of these elements, but what I've tried to do in all these slides is really take account of some of the lessons that were learned from the 2008-2009 financial crisis. You know, every situation obviously is different, and this crisis will bring its own challenges, but these in particular are some of the learnings that I learned the painful way in the 2008-2009 period, and thought that would be worth sharing that from an asset manager's perspective. You know, some of the obvious stuff is you know, surely you'll be, if you weren't already very clearly aware of what equipment you've got on your books, I'm sure you're all paying great attention to that, really trying to understand the implications of what your portfolio looks like. Again, if you have residual exposure in your book, if it's not guaranteed by a third party, how can you manage that? And I'll get into a little bit of that in the coming pages. Obviously, again, whether the assets come back through default or whether they're returned at end of lease or even early terminated, you know, questions around what do your current remarketing channels look like? Are they going to be sufficient for the volume of equipment that's coming back? Are there different approaches that you need to take? You know, do you need to diversify your channels to market? How do you make sure that you have partners that you can rely on and trust, and that they'll give your business the priority that it needs as over and above somebody else's? So in very, very concrete terms, we try and look at, you know, what alternatives do you have in place today? And then in a very practical sense, what could you quickly develop and implement? And it's not on the slide, but just to give a bit more color to this, if you consider, some of you, I'm sure, are leasing cars and probably have, you know, well developed. If you keep on the previous page, Rafael, actually, that would, it doesn't make a big difference. So in terms of cars as an example, many companies will use an auction channel as the route to market. Others will have developed business to business remarketing channels. Lessons learned from the 2008-2009 crisis was to try and increase the options. That might have included trying to encourage the existing users of the vehicles to either buy at the end of lease, so selling direct to drivers, having them extend the lease contract with the drivers. Also, from personal experience, we developed in the DLL organization where I was at the time, we developed retail options, so selling directly to consumers and building some showroom capacity because we had very large volumes of equipment to ship. And beyond that, looking to see what you could do in terms of export channels, putting financing around new offers to either existing customers or new customers, and also trying to enhance your offer by the use of warranties and guarantees to give customers the confidence that they're buying a good vehicle. Clearly, your approach on the end of lease management, will rely upon the scale of problem that you have at hand, the investment that would be required, and also obviously the internal competencies that you have within your business and the processes and skill set that you have to hand to manage this situation. So, Rafael, if you can maybe move to the next. So I maybe covered the first question. Am I better to try and keep the assets with the clients? This clearly relies a little bit on an understanding of what's the value of the equipment. Do I have a good sense of what customers are likely to do and want to do? And obviously working hand in hand with the credit and workout groups to assess the exposure that you have with your customer base. But I would just say be very, very proactive in all these areas. First and foremost, understand your risk position, understand as best you can what your clients are likely to do, and really pay attention and use your sales force and any agents to gather as much intelligence as you can. And then once you've gathered as much information as you can, clearly then you should have a clear process of decision making and prioritization. Another aspect that is maybe worth just keying in on for a moment is the risk of fraud and assets essentially disappearing out of sight in these times. And again, clearly from experience in such times as we're living through at the moment, the risk of either the criminally inclined or the desperate to do something that you might not see in more conventional times is heightened. And one of the things that we've got a lot of experience of and we see clients increasingly turn to is the use of remote inspection technology. And there are a number of applications available that help clients get better confidence over the location and indeed the condition of the equipment that they have, either sitting with dealers or sitting with end customers. Rafael, perhaps we can move to the next one. So again, I've already addressed some of these questions earlier in the discussion around the car example. But again, depending upon your business model, you may or may not have developed remarketing channels to market. And if you're in a position where you already have these in place, that's terrific. But if you don't, then I would say don't wait for the flood of equipment to come back, because unfortunately, even though we might be at the early phase in terms of defaults, I think there's a very, very good chance, unfortunately, that we're going to see significant volumes of equipment come back. And then, it's right to just sit and consider what should I do? Should I try and offer financing alternatives to redeploy the equipment with new customers or existing customers? Do you have clients who would normally go for new equipment, that you could persuade them to go for a mix of new and used equipment that you happen to have either coming back or sitting in stock. And in the event that you can't find an easy place to redeploy the equipment, does it make sense to hold the equipment and wait for the market to recover? And again, experience from the 2008-2009 period is that, you know, some markets bounce back from, you know, really significant deviations from standard pricing to nearly normal levels within, you know, relatively short order, within a space of 6 to 8 months. So do you have the capacity, do you have the facilities and operational capability, excuse me, just to hold the equipment and indeed the liquidity to wait for the market to recover? And again, in all these scenarios, the question at the bottom of the page is, you know, do you have the level of competence and experience within your business today to make sure you select the right strategy? Because I know from personal experience, lots of companies had adopted different strategies, and some of the companies really made significant differences to their bottom line by not selling at the bottom of the market. But again, that's somewhat of a judgment call. So the next slide is a little bit to Rafael's earlier point about, you know, from adversity comes opportunity. And again, every business will have a different perspective on these, but I just tried to put a few thoughts here upon areas where, you know, our industry can really play a really significant role in helping the real economy. And in that sense, just really focusing on the first two bullets, you know, for clients who have plant and equipment that they've paid for and is sitting in their facilities, you know, is that something where sale and leaseback could be a proactive offer that you would like to go and help the clients increase the cash flow in their business and provide a business opportunity for yourselves? Clearly, sale and leaseback is something that requires consideration, and it requires good risk management. But it is potentially something to really think about, and especially in a vendor finance market, you might be able to get a list of clients that have acquired equipment through cash, and you can proactively credit screen that target list, and then essentially go after those clients with a proactive leasing offer, having a good sense of what the asset value would be, and that, as I said, you've already pre-screened them, and that you should be able to prudently offer a good solution for them. Already referenced the previous point about the used equipment mix. If it's already on your books, then essentially, unless it's a client that's going to go straight into default, or you'll have challenges recovering the equipment, I would suggest that's really something to consider. And for clients, or customers rather, and organizations that perhaps in the past have steered away from used equipment, it really could be quite a good opportunity for clients to access equipment at a lower price point. And for the leasing company, the gap, the depreciation gap that you always lose when you acquire a new piece of equipment, you've already avoided that piece. So in a sense, if it's priced correctly and you've managed the assessment of the asset correctly, arguably there's a lower credit risk for yourselves if you were going to go after that. An area just in passing that I'll touch on is pay-per-use. It's a topic that is increasing in popularity in various markets. I would guess there's a good chance that clients will continue to want to have access to this type of solution. And if you don't already have that capability, depending upon your risk appetite, that's maybe something to start to think about in these times. And clearly, there might be greater pressing priorities for collections and recovery and asset management functions and operations groups. But if you've got a commercial organisation that's maybe not as busy as it normally is with new customer developments, it might be something for them to start to think about. So the next block around exploiting opportunities safely, I've already talked to some of that already. There are clearly great emphasis to be placed upon understanding the equipment, validating that the assets exist, and again, there are technologies and techniques you can use to do that more safely than might be the case. Clearly important to have a good process around assessing values, and as I suggested, there's potentially a good opportunity with used equipment. One thing that we haven't really focused upon, but again in these times, something just I would really focus in on here is partnership with your business partners. Make sure you're close to these guys. Rafael mentioned it already, but really understand the motivations of the people you're working with. Try and get as aligned as you can with them, and be realistic about what people's objectives are and their financial standing and strength and ability to help you as a business move forward in challenging times. It's an area to focus in on if you've got a large exposure to dealers or to OEMs in particular, but also if you've got remarketing partners. Again, an area to pay attention to. Make sure that your equipment is getting paid to you in a timely fashion. Make sure that the equipment is where it is expected to be, and make sure you have good audit processes around that to make sure that, again, in stress times, you make sure you get paid and that your assets are secured. So the last point I have, and then I'll hand the baton back to Rafael, is really just around KPIs and incentives. I'm a big believer in measurement and keeping on top of business through information. And in addition to having the right information and measurements, it's also really important to have the right key performance indicators and incentives in place to drive the right behaviors across the whole organization. And again, making sure that from the front end commercial team through to the guys that are working in the credit function and working in operations and workouts and through to the asset management and remarketing processes, everybody has the right incentives to drive the right behaviors in these challenging times. And with that in mind, I just wish everybody great success. I hope the bottom of this market isn't as bleak as perhaps some people fear. And we're very, very happy to be called on to support if we can ever help. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ian. I think that you are leaving us a lot of food for thought, and there are several areas. We are going to drill down a little bit more in some of the areas you already touched. But at the end of this presentation, also, if you have any questions for Ian, we are going to address also your questions in the field. And I see that currently there are some questions that, Ian, you can contribute a lot to providing the answer to that. In particular with what is the future of certain markets like the auto or motor vehicles market. But let's move a little bit to talk about technology, which is a key area of building value in equipment leasing and financing companies. And I will start by this cartoon that I received early this morning from our digital transformation leader, Roberto Fernandez, who actually is our digital transformation leader for emerging markets. And I think that it's self-explanatory. I mean, those who were procrastinating in terms of digital transformation are going to get hit by the COVID-19. You have no choice but rely upon technology at this moment. And this is the basic message. I mean, this is not the fact that this is a nice to have. It's a must. We need to rely on technology. So what are the basics? The basics are, you are forced to send your people to work at home. Most of you, because of the lockdowns and everything else, or sometimes because you want to be prudent and not have a focus of infection in your offices, then you keep the people at home. And then the basics means, number one, you need to ensure that the software licenses used by your officials are legal. For example, if they are using Microsoft Office 365, are you sure that everyone has the right license and the access to use that? There are, of course, several other software, but I mentioned just the purely elementary software. The second one is how you can get connected your employees to the files within the company. And that's what we call network. There are two kinds, of course. There is let's say the private network, which is called a VPN, virtual private networks. They enable your employees to have remote access to the files. But of course, you must define the levels of access that your employees have depending on their role and their position. So this is an area that if you have not defined, you should define it right now. Now, if you don't have a VPN, then the good news is that you can use the cloud. The key question is how can you use the cloud? So these are some of the key players of the cloud. You have Dropbox, you have Trello, you have Box, you have Monday, Google Drive. Out of the picture, we have OneDrive from Microsoft. We have Amazon warehouse system. And the key suggestion here is that your choice of the cloud network should follow at least the following requirements. By the way, this is an area where our digital transformation practice can help. What you need to ensure is that the cloud can offer you collaboration. I mean, the people can work together, and the network will facilitate that. Number two, asset transfer. Your employee can work in their own computer, but should be able to drag and drop the file into the cloud, into the system. Number three, encryption. You need to have your information protected, especially from hackers. When you have your servers up accessible through the internet, so you need to have a lot of security there, and encryption is a key one. The other requirement is have real-time synchronization. This is very important. Your people are working, updating files, and you should be able to access the files with the last version as fast as possible. So the network should provide, the cloud should provide real-time synchronization. Workflow management. The network should also provide the possibility for you to manage the workflow of your team. Same with document management. You need to have a kind of librarian system, so you should be able to, in a very organized way, localize how the documents are allocated within the files in the cloud. Electronic signature, very important. You want to keep doing business. We are suggesting you must keep doing business. Keep contacted with your clients. You can do new business. You can receive new applications. So try to implement electronic signature. We are going to talk a little bit more about this a little bit later, but this is something that is not rocket science. It's already embedded in all our legal systems. So it's the right time to adopt electronic signatures. Instant messages are very useful tools because you don't need to be in the phone communicating every time with your people. If you have a protocol of instant messages, you can have the same kind of communication you could have at the office. And of course, having a search engine is very useful to locate in this document management field the files that you are working with. So this is one of the key elementary recommendations in terms of technology. Now, how do you communicate with the customers? Of course, the usual system, the telephone. But sometimes telephone is becoming a little bit challenging. You don't get communication with your customer. He's busy in another line, or he's not taking calls. So probably the telephone is not as efficient as it used to be in the past. WhatsApp and similar text like Monday, Sendex, Live Agent have become very, very useful. The only trap with WhatsApp is that WhatsApp is also used, or at least in my case, by my friends. And some of them are currently with a lot of free time. So they flood my WhatsApp account with something which is not relevant. But from time to time, I receive business messages, important business messages from my business partners and clients. And WhatsApp is certainly one of the good mechanisms to do that. Video conference, which is what we are doing, is becoming very, very useful. Even Zoom, that has been challenged because of security issues, they have improved very much. And you can see we are using Zoom at this time, and I think that the system is very reliable in connection with that. Another important point that you need to put into motion right now are portals to capture information. You should enable your clients to file credit applications, to propose new business online. So if you can change or create a portal within your website where your customers can communicate and you can do business using these portals, this is going to be a very important business enhancer. So we suggest you to pay attention to that. Electronic file exchange is also very important. You can do that either by email or by the cloud. I have seen, for example, that there are some inquiries received from some of you. You may want to have the PowerPoint presentation, and we will be happy to share that with you. The problem is that it's so heavy that cannot be transported by email. So we are going to give you is to have you available in the cloud. Whoever wants to have the PowerPoint presentation, just send us an inquiry, and we will be happy to send you the link to the cloud so you can download the PowerPoint in itself. For all the rest, we are going to submit this presentation in PDF format, which can be transported by email. And then finally, we suggest very strongly that you should implement now electronic and digital signature solutions, because you cannot get out, you cannot take your people out to the street because of the pandemic, but you can get into the customer and get the customer to sign and send you money using electronic signature solutions. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about digital contracts. And basically, general introduction. Most of our countries in the Middle East and Africa, and emerging markets in general, have made a lot of improvements in adopting legislation giving legal value to digital signatures. And digital signatures come from the electronic signature, which is the gender, the overall, and the digital signature, which is the species. I mean, all digital signatures are electronic signatures, but not electronic signatures are digital signatures. So you can have, for example, the biometric signature that can have with the iris, for example. You can have the electronic pen, which is basically a mobile drive that you can connect into any device in any computer. Is yours, is unique, is your signature. You can just check in a box in a computer with your mouse, or you put the finger on your screen, which is something that we use customarily with our smartphones or our tablets. You can have the whole system of a username and password. The combination of the two of them is a signature in itself from legal purposes. You can have the coordinates cards that are used by banks, especially in terms of money transfers. But it's so complex that probably is not the best way. And finally, you can have the digital signature. There are many services like DocuSign, for example, that offer the possibility for you to sign a document, and that document would have legal effects exactly if it was signed by hand. So what do we have in terms of digital signature? What is exactly the way it works? Well, digital signature authenticates the author and the content of the document. And it works through the generation of an algorithm and an algorithm of verification. So there is an algorithm that generates, and there's another algorithm that verifies the one that was generated. The association of the two of them provides the authentication of the digital signature. In some cases, you may need a referee, or in some cases, you don't need a referee. So in the case of when you need a referee, that will obviously facilitate the evidence if you need to go to court. There are certification entities that most of the laws, most of the statutes that have regulated digital signatures create licensed certification entities that have the legal power as a notary to authenticate digital signatures. You can have service providers that could attest that in real time, it could be through the cloud, in real time, you sign digitally a document and they have that stored in a certain server. You can use blockchain. In blockchain, the witnesses are every members of the blockchain. They are the witnesses of and they can authenticate the system in itself with the hash systems. It authenticates the digital signature. And the bottom line is that in most of the countries, these digital signatures are legally recognized, so they have legal effects, so you don't lose anything. Let me give you some examples. We have, for example, Turkey has an electronic signature law. The United Arab Emirates enacted another one in 2002. Israel enacted another in 2001. You could see in this table the different countries that have regulations of electronic signatures. We have from Algeria, Bahrain, Djibouti, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Morocco, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Tunisia, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. And you can also see that we have other countries that have certification authorities, and they have the system working very well. So in practice, all these countries, and again, we are going to share this information with you, can use electronic signature with legal value. So the next steps that you need to undertake is how to implement electronic contracts. And that's where you need to put into motion your digital transformation capabilities. This is a field where our team can help you if you want. And I think it's a good investment of your time and money, of course. Now, the tiger, credit risk is the next one. And now in the time of COVID-19, we have the challenge of keeping the credit risk at bay, because this tiger is going to get out of the cage. This is not the Bronx Zoo tiger that unfortunately was contaminated with the COVID-19. But this is a tiger that may eventually go to you if you don't take care of your credit risk in these times of challenge. And in this time of challenges, the basic threats of credit risk management emerge. I would say that in my case, I have oversimplified. We have, as you know, we have one webinar. We provide training very detailed about credit risk management. And what experience has shown us, the combination of experience and best practices in terms of credit risk management around the world, is that we can summarize the key components of credit in these 3 C's: character, capacity, and collateral. And it is very simple. What it says is that people don't pay because they don't want, that's character, or they cannot, that's capacity. And the collateral is what happens if your customers don't pay. Am I protected? Do I have my investment protected by the collateral? So in this time and dates, we need to focus on these 3 C's in a different way. Number one, in terms of character, and who have participated in our credit risk management presentations and training, you know that we developed out of the experience and for many years an enhancement of the credit scoring system about character that was initially started and imposed by Fair Isaac and Company, the so-called FICO credit scoring, where most of the credit scoring are based around the world. We believe that the FICO is very insufficient. It doesn't show exactly the effect that character has and may have in terms of compliance, in terms of defaults. Based upon the positive psychology school, we develop a credit scoring system based on character. This is available in our webinars about credit risk management. But what we suggest in this case is that even if you have not a very comprehensive credit rating system in terms of character, you should review your customers and classify them according to their character. Because our suggestion is the following: those clients that are bad characters are the clients that are going to take you to court. They are going to take advantage of the crisis to stop paying you. The good clients, those that have good character and have the conscious of the importance of honor their commitments, they are going to be amenable and subject for you to be generous and offer them restructures and workouts. And then if you take this group of customers, then you need to work with them in analyzing their capacity, which is basically their ability to generate cash flow. So you need to work in that connection, working in a stress test and determine the impact that the crisis is going to inflict to these customers and how the cash flow is going to behave, because this is going to shape exactly the way as you should restructure the obligations of these good customers in the future. Again, for the rest, don't waste your time. You are going to court. And the collateral. Jan mentioned that very importantly. Number one, you need to update the inspection of the lease or of assets that you have rented using remote technologies. We have been lucky enough that we found a very interesting technology developed in the Netherlands that works through an application. It's a software as a service solution, is inexpensive, and can provide to you right now the ability to inspect all your lease assets, track where the assets are located, and it goes and examines the secondary market trends of these goods, because it has an application that goes using artificial intelligence to the main marketplaces that exist in connection with the assets that you hold. So this review of collateral is very important. Jan already mentioned that, and I want to underscore this point. If you have good collateral, and sometimes, that goes a little bit anticipating an answer to a question that was asked, sometimes these crises take or bring the collateral effect that existing assets, secondary market assets, tend to go up in terms of crisis. So this is something that is important to be taken into account. So collateral is very important, especially when you find out that either the character of your customers is not good, then you don't have any other remedy than going after your collateral, or when the capacity actually is so undermined by your clients that probably their business is not going to be viable. So in that case, collateral is going to be the most relevant solution. And here we have the situation because 3 legal ghosts have emerged in this time of crisis. And these 3 legal clauses are the force majeure, the so-called rebus sic stantibus clause, which is the theory of the unforeseen, and the MAC clause, the material adverse change clause. Most of you probably come either from civil law system. I mean, those of you that come from Afrique francophone. So you have the civil law system based on the Napoleonic Code. And if it's that system, so force majeure is clearly a cause of excuse to pay obligations. Those of you that are subject to Sharia law must be familiar with the concept of quwa qahira, which again also leads to the suspension of obligations. Suspension of obligations, not excuse, different to the civil law system. In the Anglo-Saxon law system, so we are talking about Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and some other countries, South Africa, and so on. The Anglo-Saxon systems have a definition of force majeure that depends basically on what the contract provides. And in some cases, amazingly, a pandemic is not considered as force majeure, except when there is an act of authority, such as the lockdowns. But when there is not, then the doctrine of frustration of purpose could be useful. Could be useful for your obligors, for your clients. So you need to be prepared for that, because if they have good lawyers, they are going to use these legal remedies in their benefits to excuse themselves for paying you what they owe you under the contracts. The rebus sic stantibus clause basically is a clause that provides that there is an unforeseen event, then the party that has been affected by the unforeseen event could seek equitable remedies to adjust the conditions of the contract. In Sharia law, it's called al-suruf al-tariya, which is, and the rebus sic stantibus, which is a principle that was introduced by the Italian Civil Code, has been enacted in most of the civil code countries, again, Afrique francophone. This is not present and is not very used in common law countries, but by reference, eventually it could be used. So you need to be aware that these remedies exist. The MAC clause is something that you may have in your contracts, but you need to be very careful how to apply that. Certainly, material adverse change has happened with the COVID-19. So you can use that remedy if you want to early terminate an agreement and then be able to quickly repossess. If you have that clause, probably you can speed up your repossession processes for the clients of bad character. But you need also to be careful if you have that clause in your funding relationship, in your loan agreements with your funding sources, because in that case, probably this is going also to affect your business as well. So how do you undertake a stress test of capacity? What we suggest here is that you sit down with your good clients, review their supply chain structure, as we talk about the recomposing of a supply chain. You undertake with them a SWOT analysis of each link of the supply chain, meaning each link, each supplier, each distribution player, and so on. Then you highlight the threats and opportunity associated to the adjustments that to be made in the supply chain. And you work together with your client in validating the financial projections and the alternative scenarios that they have. Now, the solutions that you define in the restructuring agreement need to be very careful to not incur into riba or usury law whenever there is usury law. I mean, you cannot charge interest on interest. So the way as you carve out the restructure must be very careful in order to avoid to be challenged at a further court of law and you lose everything. So the suggestion here, especially for the countries that have collateral registries law, is that most of the collateral registries law status, if they have followed the United Nations model, the UCITRAL model, they also provide the possibility that future assets can be collateral. And typical example are merchant cash advances, which is everyone can, in a way, pledge the future revenues that they are going to receive from several customers if they can use a concentration bank account where everything goes there, or using, for example, credit card payments. They can pledge that. You can then enjoy a legal priority for that. And that eventually could cover any potential deficiency you may have in collateral if you are going to extend additional terms to your customers. Similar can happen with the inventory of your clients and, of course, the pledge of future receivables. All these are possibilities that you can have using the legal status, provided that in your country you have collateral registry law. I hope that some of them have it. I just discovered that Tanzania is still in process to taking them, but probably some of our good friends from the World Bank that are still with us could give us some illustration after this presentation is over. So what can we do in terms of updating the collateral? And that probably is going to answer some of the questions here. You need, first of all, to analyze the overall behavior of secondary markets for leased goods. If we are talking, for example, about cars, it's interesting because if your currency is subject to devaluation, either by effect of the reduction of exports or because of the volatility of the currency for this situation, then what is going to happen is that new imported equipment or new imported vehicles are going to be more expensive. That means that the secondary market in your country is going to improve in terms of pricing, and your collateral is going to be favored in that connection. With good customers, and we talk about that especially in the cases where you cannot help them recompose their cash flow, organizing a voluntary repossession plan is a good idea. It saves money and time. And will all the customers that are not good clients and you need to go to court or to your legal remedies, we suggest that you organize an effective strategy to repossess the asset as quick as possible. Now, let's talk about new business. how are you going to generate more new business in this pandemic? Where are the opportunities? And how to guide your sales force and your organization to focus in going after which kind of businesses. So again, the new priorities: equipping the healthcare sector, recompose supply chains, and reengineering the capital goods used for your countries. So let's start by the healthcare sector. In the healthcare sector, I suggestion is, because every country is different, is that you should review the scope of the government measures with respect to allocated resources, investment priorities, and health entities that receive benefits. You have seen in your country that the government is providing special funding to hospitals and to other institutions in order to be able to cope with the pandemic. Your contribution there is that every single dollar that has been allocated to these entities can be multiplied by 1.5 or 2 if they use leasing, because you are able to help them to get more equipment in order to be able to pay the same amount that was allocated by the government. So this is a very important point where we as lessors can add a lot of value. The second suggestion is, especially the poor Middle East countries and Africa, review the role of the donors and the amount of resources allocated. Well, we have an example. The World Bank has allocated $160 billion to help emerging markets, and especially the African countries and the poor Middle East countries. So how are these going to be used? Follow that. And again, if we have still with us some of our colleagues from IFC and the World Bank, they could give us more illustration about what is available. Next, you need to review the regulatory implications and each measure and medical habilitation of the different devices that you are going to finance. Remember that healthcare devices are regulated. So you need to make sure that whatever you are financing is compliant with sanitary legislation. Then you need to build a plan to establish partnership with equipment vendors and whoever is providing solutions applicable to COVID-19. We gave some examples back. We talk about Philips, we talk about GE Healthcare and other players. This is the kind of partners that you need to develop partnership with. Then you need to empower your sales force to understand the landscape, the industry needs, the solution priorities, logistics, etc. Educate your sales force to be able to deploy the kind of financing that is necessary for the healthcare system. And organize your asset management areas for credit risk management and post-crisis asset deployment. Yes, there is a big need now in ICU, intensive care units. But once the pandemic is over, you may anticipate that eventually the hospitals are going to have too many. Is that the case? And if this is the case, could we use, for example, the alternative of telemedicine or redeploying that into poorer populations around the country? So this is one of the things that we need to think about, and it's part of the asset management planning process. So there is a lot of things that we need to do, and there are good opportunities there. Let's talk a little bit of the information we could gather about the World Bank COVID-19 $160 billion fund. What we understand is there is a $14 billion fast-track package to respond to immediate COVID-19 health and economic needs. So they are deploying that money to the governments. So if you multiply this $14 billion times 2, we may have the opportunity to write business for over $20 billion in our countries, just with that money. EIFC has allocated $2 billion from the Real Sector Crisis Response Facility. So they are currently speeding up the process to help companies to recompose their supply chain. So that what we talked about before is not theoretically. You have the money. Just talk to IFC and you have the money to work in that field, originating new business. Same happens, $2 billion for the Global Trade Financing Program, and that especially goes to all these industries that generate exports. $2 billion for the Working Capital Solutions is addressed to emerging market banks, and one question that we have is independent lessors that are non-bank, but could be in some cases non-bank financial institutions, in other cases non-regulated, but they are respectable institutions. Can they access this $2 billion credit line? That will be a terrific good news. And then $2 billion from the Global Trade Liquidity Program to help the producers of commodities. There we can also grab this kind of funding. And in addition to that, If we can provide with our own funds, we can have the guarantees of MIGA for expedited loan guarantee. So here, there is a lot of funds that we have available if we want to go into this direction. There are some examples of what the World Bank has done in India, for example. They provided resources to expand the laboratory capacity to diagnose diseases. That could be done through leasing as well. Procure testing kits and ventilators. Set up isolation wards. Again, everything can be there funded by leasing. And these are the main countries where they have already implemented programs in a very short time. So again, later on, I hope that we can get some amplification of this from the attendees that belong to the World Bank Group. Talking about supply chains, our suggestion is the following. With existing clients, work with them to understand the capital goods investment they need to do, what are the priorities, and how to restructure the supply chains. We are talking about, for example, if they need trucks to speed up the process because there is one link in the supply chain that is not going to be in business. So we need to build a bridge between the second tier supplier and your customer, and probably they need some logistic capabilities, trucks, refrigerated trailers, and so on and so forth. That's something that you need to find out with your customers. With new customers, examine how the macroeconomic spending priorities change, analyze the exporters that are less affected by the crisis, and discuss possible sources of import substitution. This is part of the things that you can do. In re-engineering capital goods, well, let's talk about one of the basic needs of the Maslow chain, food. Well, with food, there are two ways that you can work. One is use the contract farming facility. And the contract farming facility enables you to go after a large distributor or seller of food. Could be a large supermarket in your country, could be a multinational like Nestle, or a large domestic company that is in the food and brewery business. And with them, you can build up a contract farming agreement whereby you can, for example, finance agricultural equipment with the pledge of the purchase of the crops given by one of these good risk companies. So there is a good possibility to build a business where you can help the agricultural production to keep going. Same can be done in housing and security alternatives. And needless to say, one of the alternatives that exist is also financing 3D printer solutions for construction, currently used, and even for food manufacturing and supply. In 3D printers, we have seen the following developments. When you can see, for example, that household products can be manufactured using 3D printers. You see that there exists the so-called industrial cobots, which are robots that work together with people to make more efficient the production, the manufacturing. We have drones. Rwanda has a very good example, which is the case of Zipline, a company that uses drones to distribute medical supplies around the country. And we have also medtech robots like the Da Vinci, which is a machine that develops surgery solutions. All these can be subject to local manufacturing using 3D printers and local financing that you can deploy. These are some examples of what the 3D printers have done during the pandemic. Easynova, which is an Italian institution, has developed protective masks using 3D printers. And for the knobs of the doors, this Belgian firm called Materialize, they build this adapter so that people don't need to open the doors using their hands, but using their arms. So in that way, they prevent further contagion of the virus. Now, there is another thing, there are other ways to grow, which is not necessarily generating new business, is wait and see. If you have good cash and you can see that certain other players may not be able to keep in the business, so it's the right time to think about acquisitions. They could be also the case that other companies let go good talent, good leadership team, try to keep them together through a management lift out. This is the kind of things that we are very happy and do that frequently, helping companies to use these kind of opportunities that can add additional value to the companies. Now let's move into the funding area. And the key area, remember that we talk about preserving cash. Well, the point here is how to maintain financial resources in this crisis. And let's talk a little bit about the environment. The financial markets basically are currently facing a critical mode. We have seen that governments and the central banks around the world are injecting liquidity into the economy. To be perfectly blunt, they are printing money. And that money is coming into the system. The main recipients of that money are commercial banks. But other recipients are consumers, especially in the rich countries, in developed countries. Here in the United States, for example, the government is deploying $1,200 to all taxpayers that earn less than $75,000 a year. So we should be expecting to receive some government aid, and that money comes obviously from the printed money that is coming in all these countries. But certainly we have an emerging liquidity risk management. The immediate actions that we suggest is if you have approved lines of credit that you have not used, use them. Cash is king. If you have short-term investments like corporate bonds or government bonds, sell them. Keep everything in cash. Now, refine and extend your liquidity risk measures, because you need to anticipate that your cash flow is going to be impaired, because there are going to be a lot of your clients are going to default on their obligations. So you need to be ready to develop a stress test and early warning indicators. And be prepared to renegotiate your obligations with your creditors. You need to extend more terms. And those who use the stock and capital markets using securitizations or sukuk in the case of Islamic financing, be aware that these markets in these kind of times, they are dry. So you cannot refinance this kind of obligations. You need to pay them with money that comes out of your cash flow or from bank financing. This is something that certainly happens in this kind of crisis. After the crisis, what is going to happen? Well, we can foresee that because of this printing process, because the production is going to be reduced, certainly prices are going to go up. We were not used, and many of you probably you never live in times of inflationary environment. I did in the early 1980s. And believe me, it's a different normal, it's a different situation. We need to be prepared for that. One of the immediate effects that are going to happen is that interest rates in emerging markets are probably go up. And then the gap between the developed world interest rates and the emerging markets interest rate is going to be high. And also external indebtedness, I mean, getting money from abroad may still be competitive if we have some, even assuming high devaluation rates. So that's the reason why you need to keep close contacts with the likes of IFC, because they can provide good funding in long and medium term. So having said this, I would like to pass the baton to Ali Diallo, which is one of our business partners in Africa. Ali has over 20 years of experience in the financial services, has been involved in the leasing industry in Africa. He was for many years leading the Alios Finance Group, CEO in Zambia, and also working in two other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. He has, as you can see, good credentials in terms of his academic formation and his abilities in Islamic financing as well. And Ali has been kind enough to offer to share with us his view and his foresight on the African effects of the COVID-19. So Ali, if you are so kind, please take the baton. I will be your secretary here.
Thank you, Rafael, and hello to everyone. Thank you for having me, Rafael, and my best wishes to all the participants to this webinar. We are living in a particular time, and I wish you all the best. So I will start talking about the impact of COVID-19 in sub-Saharan Africa. As you can see, Africa has recorded as at end of last week, actually, 11,000 cases of COVID-19 and 562 deaths which is not too bad actually compared to other continents, I would say. However, these numbers, they change on a daily basis, if not every hour. And even if there is a low level of infections as of now, numbers are growing fast, according to WHO. So it's important to bear in mind that even if it's contained now, it's not true that the situation will remain like that. The impact on the continent GDP will be significant actually, as from a growth of 2.1% in 2019, economists predict now that we'll face a decline of 5.1% in 2020. And this hasn't happened since 1995, where Africa experienced a recession at that time. So as a result, some people asked to cancel the debts of African countries. We can mention the Pope, recently the President of Senegal, Macky Sall, and even Emmanuel Macron, President of France, among others. These people have asked for a cancellation of the debts, and it's happening somehow. If you follow the news, even yesterday, there were decisions in that sense. So in terms of response, the African Development Bank has allocated $10 billion to help African countries, and ECOWAS, which is the institution that contain all West African countries, they mobilized medical supplies and essential equipment for West African countries. So there are some few examples of measures that have been taken. We can move to the next slide, Rafael.
Yes.
So, what is the context in West Africa? We have a sort of situation in a few areas. First, when it comes to trading, we can already witness that there is a decrease in commodities, global demand, and prices. It's important to know that gold, when you take gold, cocoa, cashew nuts, oil, and cotton, all of these represent 65% of exports in West Africa. So except the gold, where we can see that the price has risen recently, which is good news for some West African countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire. But for all others, it's difficult because 65% of exports for some commodities that are impacted in terms of price and demand, you can imagine how it is. So, not to mention the oil price, because it fell from about $65 the barrel to $25 approximately the past weeks. And for some countries who produce oil, they will have, and they already started adjusting drastically their budget. This is the case for Nigeria, for instance. When we look at money transfers from the diaspora represent 5 to 10% of GDP in some countries like Senegal, Mali, and Togo. And these transfers, they have literally stopped because 65% of these transfers come from Europe, actually, and notably from France and Italy. Each of these countries represent roughly 25% of these transfers. So, and these countries, they have stopped all activities currently. So it means that there is no more money transfer that is coming currently. So as a result, what we can see is that the economic activity is slowing down. But this is in the entire world that is happening, obviously. The sector that is more impacted is the tertiary sector, particularly tourism, hospitality, transport. Some restrictive measures have been put in place. Social distancing, some lockdowns in a few countries. Some of them, they close businesses, and others, they close borders. When you look at a country like Ivory Coast, and you realize that tourism and travels account for 10% of GDP in that country, you can imagine how much it's a challenge, and it's the same situation in Senegal. Other activity sectors like infrastructures, agriculture, manufacturing, oil production are also exposed. However, a change on how we approach production in this country could probably create new opportunities. So we are witnessing currently a situation where governments and central banks are taking measures to smoothen the life of populations, and these measures, if the crisis lasts a long time, they can lead to pressure public finances. And what would happen then is that, as you can see on the screen, would create a further slowdown in the execution of structural projects and in economic activity as a whole. The public and private investment will probably stop, and we'll have a further contraction of the GDP. I already mentioned that it would be a decrease of 5.1% is what is predicted. And we could face a situation where we see some banks, and there will be a dry, so the lack of financial resources in the end. But we are not there yet, because it's a bit soon to know what will happen. So thank you for showing the following slide. So here you have some examples of, cases, number of cases, and for the 4 biggest markets in West Africa, namely Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal, together with a sample of initiatives that have been taken as responses to the pandemic. I will not elaborate too much on them, since just as the numbers, these measures are decided and implemented as we go on. But this information gives you an idea on how the countries have been affected and what they provide as responses. As I was saying, the impact so far is not too big in terms of casualties. So, Rafael, we can go to the next one. So here I will spend a bit of time here. So here are the few challenges that were identified earlier by Jan. For the leasing sector, I would like to spend more time here on them and provide some suggestions on how we could address them. The list is not exhaustive for sure, and can still be adapted depending on on the situation and the activity sectors, etc. So the first one is commercial activities, where we realize that obviously actions on the ground and even the deadlines we had and we faced, they took a hit. So what is the solution about that? What to do? We suggest that we reorganize the way we work. So we reorganize teams, and notably via the digital transformation Rafael referred to earlier. We can provide teams with suitable tools in order for them to be able to work remotely and be more efficient. It's important to look at the economy and the line of businesses, the activity, and see what are the businesses and the activity sectors that are really impacted by the COVID-19, because it's true that we have some of them where in general they are impacted, however, can differ from one market to another. So it's important to evaluate that. Then assess and monitor the availability and time frames on asset deliveries. This is very important because, as you know, in Africa, there is no such production of equipment, cars, etc. So everything is imported. But what will happen when now people will go back to work, etc.? For sure, if there is any demand, the first served will probably be the one who are in the markets where the car makers, equipment makers, they are. And then Africa will probably not be a priority. So it's important to know exactly, to have a good idea on if a vendor, a supplier would like to have a stock of equipment and stock of spare parts, etc. It's important to have an idea of when that will happen. Okay, and it will have an impact on the lessor, because if there is no availability of goods, then there is no transaction that is done. So in terms of relationship with the customer, currently, as any of us, we prioritize vital and primary needs. Rafael mentioned it when we look at Maslow, the pyramid. And it's very normal because we are, we'll say, in a survival mode more than anything else. So during that time, it's important to carry out some surveys and to question the customers on really their needs. They identify those that can be covered on a short and medium term. They exist. Some customers still have needs in the health sector, in agriculture sector as well. So it's important to know them and to engage then with the clients who show potential to do more business. So in terms of new customer, it's true that it will be difficult for people currently to go for and undertake new projects and etc. to expand, because it's not the time for that if they are in a risky activity sector because of COVID-19. So, but there is still the possibility to find some market niche, and if we do find them, then engage with these customers virtually and monitor the relationship remotely. So, but the priority really, to be practical, the priority currently is to deal with existing customers because of the serious level of uncertainty that we do face at present. So this probably will be the main interest that the lessor will have at the moment. In terms of credit decisioning, one of the aspects that is not really possible currently is, when it comes to the due diligence, because when a lessor will assess a case and then go through the documents, all the lights are green, it's important, to have an idea on the ground of whether what is on paper corresponds to the reality. So this is not possible. No one can move and go and visit the applicant. So what are the is to still do business in this context is to, for the existing clients, obviously, is to rely on what they already did about their performance until now, and try to obtain maximum information allowing to better mitigate the risk for the new customers. This could be done by integrating what I would call new allies in the process who could provide reliable information. So to find maybe reliable people and reliable organizations where we can get additional information that will allow the lessor to secure better the risk. It can also be done by developing initiatives to have access to the information remotely. Okay, I'm thinking out of the box, but Rafael mentioned the drones that are used in Rwanda in the health sector. Why not thinking about, a situation where a lessor would like just to confirm an information on the ground, the existence of something that is like, physical, etc., be able to have access via that technology. So there are some possibilities, that are there. So another thing is to work towards including insurance covers, meant to further secure the risk in this uncertain time. And one aspect that is not there is to think about the funding and the transaction itself, because since the funding will become more expensive, and we would like to make a decision on an application, it's important to make sure that you don't lose money as a lessor. So if the funding is cost is not reasonable, so it's better even not to go and do and go for a new transaction, because then you will lose money. So restructuring customer payments. There it's important to have a better knowledge of these activity sectors, where the customers are involved in, and their seasonality as well. It's important to be proactive in order to really prevent the increase of the NPL portfolio. And the way to do it is to really engage as soon as possible the customers who are involved in these impacted activity sectors that you manage to identify, and to propose to offer them some arrangements allowing you to manage adequately all commitments that become now at risk, as a lessor. But the current situation necessitates to be more flexible and sensible, but without putting actually the business at risk. So yeah, we can move to the next slide.
Sorry.
So yeah, so remarketing capabilities. The current situation leads to limited and restricted access to and follow up to almost all stakeholders. This is valid for marketing capabilities, but it's valid it's a general situation. So we suggest to partner with firms involved in digital communication and marketing, as well as adjust inbound and outbound, strategies. So, this is true for marketing, but even if you want to market like something, for example, if you want to put some pop-ups in a supplier showroom currently, like right now, I'm not sure you'll be able to impact any prospect because you don't have access to them. So it's really important to rethink the approach. So when it comes to assets risk management, vendor partner, risk management, collection and recovery, proactive portfolio management, audits, operational and service risk, business continuity and fraud prevention, it is the same challenge as the one that was identified above. And we suggest to deal with it through the expansion and the reinforcement of interactions with stakeholders and the management approaches in a remote fashion. Also, the development and increase of use adapted tools in every possible way via new or upgraded processes, applications, and devices. And it's also, it will be a good thing to actually promote interactive links, but done remotely. So this is it for the issues identified and the possible solutions that we suggest. We can move to the next and final slide for me. Okay, thank you. Sorry, we were there actually.
Yes.
Thank you. So, essentially, indeed, COVID-19 is a game changer. Okay, and as a way forward, we can highlight and we can see that it will change the way people live. It has requalified our priorities and our needs. So the lessors and all the stakeholders around him should adapt to this new era. There's a change on how we work. For example, I was listening just yesterday. I attended a webinar, and the CEO of a financial group who realized that his institution, you just realized that actually his institution, they didn't need so many branches. So it means that people realize that actually there is a way to optimize, there is a way to work and be still efficient, but have less expenses, overheads, and costs. And so it's an opportunity actually to reorganize ourselves. And the big winner here is really the digital approach, and it will play a major role on how we shift our working habits. And for the industry, the way also we approach, we materialize, we manage, we monitor the business, the relationship, the way we deal with customers and all other stakeholders. All this will change, and we must adapt actually to those changes. So this is what I can say, Rafael and everybody, and then I can get back to you now.
Thank you, Ali. I think that this slide is a good summary of what we need all of us to understand, because we should avoid the fact that once the pandemic is over, we tend to forget what the lessons that we should have learned. And one of the lessons that we should have learned is about these changes, how people live, how people work, and how the industry can work. And I think that you mentioned that, and we have mentioned that across this webinar. Let's take advantage of technology. Let's review how we work together and how we interact with our people. Don't ignore the need of leadership within our organization and to implement that. And of course, keep in mind the 10 pillars of generation of value if we want to do a sustainable leasing business. Take the opportunities. So thank you very much, everyone, for having paid attention for us over these 2 hours and 20 minutes. But even though I would like to beg your additional time, just for the opportunity for exchanging ideas, now the floor will be offered to you. We have some written questions that are already there. Some of them were already answered. Some are still pending. So I would like to go into the questions unless someone raised their hand and wants to speak, because in that case, probably we can give that opportunity, and then we go to the question and answers. Catherine, do you want to conduct that distribution if we have anyone wanting to speak?
At this moment, I don't have any raised hands, but I do have in the chat, I don't know if you can see it, there is a question for Ian from Mr. Singh. It says, hi Ian, shouldn't existing customer retention move in line with remarketing to high organizational capability? You can see it in the all panelists inside the chat.
I see it, Catherine. Thanks very much. Yeah, it's like all these things. It's a bit of a blurred line. I think it's arguable around the existing customer retention. One of the areas that why it was put into that category, just to show a change in emphasis from business as normal, was really around the question of liquidity. And again, one of the lessons from the previous crisis, and there was another question relating to that, which we'll maybe get to later as well, was really just, it's a great opportunity to you should be doing this as a discipline anyway in your business, is always looking at the profitability and the viability of relationships. But it was one of the exercises that in the business that I was part of in the last crisis, we took a very, very, very rigorous review of all relationships, and actually in those circumstances did decide in a very professional and measured and respectful way to step back from some relationships. So in that sense, something to have in mind. And I would just say, if you do, by force of circumstances, we didn't do it because we didn't have liquidity, but it might be the case for some of yourselves that you face this circumstance, and in those situations it's worth conducting that very diligently and professionally. And if you do step back from certain relationships, make sure that you communicate that as openly, transparently, and as politely and fairly as you can. I mean, clearly, in general, it's ideal if you can continue to manage relationships, but again, it can be in these times, if liquidity becomes challenging, that there may be requirements to raise pricing and have some very, very difficult questions and conversations and dialogues with your customer base. And hopefully we don't encounter these situations in the coming weeks and months, but just something that, you know, I'm sure a lot of us on the line have lived through and experienced, but I just wanted to make that point. You know, clearly customer retention in general is something that you should pay great attention to and maintain as much as you possibly can. The reason there was that slight change of emphasis was as I just explained, along with the fact that just a change of emphasis in the business. For some companies, it will be not necessarily a question of survival, but for some it might be. So paying attention to keeping the lights on and maintaining cash flow and liquidity, as Rafael mentioned a few times, it's critical in these days.
Thank you so much. I want at this point to remind everybody that besides the question and answers that is going to be on the bottom line of your screen, you can also use the feature of raise your hand, and I will unmute your microphone so that you can contribute or you can make a question so that we can also have a discussion. While that, I would like to allow Mr. Jonathan Giggin to go ahead and make the question. Mr. Jonathan Giggin. In the meantime, would you like to go ahead with the questions? We have a couple of questions.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead, Rafael. While
when Jonathan has his microphone on mute, and we can.
He's here with us, Mr. Giggin. Go ahead, please.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just a bit curious, right? You know, I know that the demand for this equipment is actually temporal. And I also know that, you know, that the basic, you know, demand is coming from the government, right? Now, so if we have a situation where this demand is temporal, right, and it's short term, right? So I'm just wondering the consequences, right? There could be, right, in a situation where you finance an equipment and then you realize that the COVID-19 cases have dropped significantly, and then there's minimal use of this equipment. How does this really play out, right? Because then it definitely will affect your rentals, right? You know, and this is one side I'm looking at it. And then the other side as well is that, you know, we're now dealing with governments, you know, most, practitioners in Africa, a few of them actually do with government, right? And then you're realizing now that actually the potential client that we're looking at within the basis of this COVID-19 could be government, right? So now, how do you structure transactions in such a way that, you know, you ensure that, you know, that there would be payments, you know, even in an event where, you know, we know that, you know, that we no longer have most cases of this COVID-19. I think we're good to have a sense of, you know, how this will play out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think it's a great question, and it's very down to earth, because you know, in real life, what you said is absolute. I mean, it's absolutely clear that happens. So our suggestion is in the following field. Number one, yes, you are currently screening the eventual credit risk that will happen after the crisis. After the crisis, everyone is eager to get the equipment. Everyone is eager to deploy budget. But at the end of the day, if you don't, I mean, once the urgency goes away, probably the priority to paying you goes away as well. What could be the answer to that? Well, number one, I think that it's very important to use the tools at hand. In your country, for example, the use of their collateral registry possibilities to get the pledge of the revenues of these healthcare institutions is one of the areas where you can do that. But the second one, and I mentioned, for example, what MIGA can offer, but there are some other government guarantees that at this moment should be available for these kind of structures, again, because of the urgency. Each country is going to change, certainly have different set of rules, or that there is always important to conduct the due diligence. But since the opportunity is there, and I see that you have the credit risk mentality and the skills to really drill down on and structuring this well, I think that using the resources that are available in terms of guarantees, government guarantees, multilateral guarantees, like the case of MIGA, for example, and the ability to pledge, together, of course, with your reading and appraisal of the character of the of the healthcare institution that you are going to finance, that should justify, you know, deploying these kind of solutions. It's going to require a little bit more, and we mentioned that. You need also to build a kind of trust relationship with that institution, because once they face the trouble that they have too much equipment, and believe me, that has happened in the United States. The United States have, the healthcare system has overstocked in terms of medical equipment. And we see that there are a lot of rooms in hospitals that are full of used equipment that is not used whatsoever, while we have in emerging markets the need of this same kind of equipment. You know, that's the paradox of this abundancy. So it may happen that certain equipment, like the intensive care units, for example, when the flow of patient goes down, they will have excess capacity. So they should be an asset management organization able to deploy that. It's important what Ali has mentioned about redeployment, and Ian has also mentioned about that. That should be part of the plan. It's not going to be easy to structure these kind of deals. They're not plain vanilla. But I think it pays back to you for two reasons. Number one, because you are really making a difference, helping the pandemic to go away. And number two, because you are developing a new kind of a structure. It's a little bit more sophisticated than just financing a car, but you are going to create a structure that you can replicate in other different models. And it will help you very much to reinforce your capability in asset management, create a screening, and so on. So yes, your questions are very well taken, and that will be just my contribution of the approach that you will take in that connection.
Next, we have Mr. George Jarkarva, and I apologize for any mispronunciation of the names now.
No problem. No,
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me good?
Yes, sir.
Perfectly.
So first of all, thank you for your interesting and practical presentation. I am from Georgia. It's a Georgian leasing company, and main problem you also mentioned that will be this. I mean, this repossession and remarketing of these assets. And for example, for European countries, Georgia is one of the markets for remarketing because we are importing from Europe. Most of our like machineries, used ones and new ones and so on. But for us, it's a small country with 3.7 million people just, and the market is not big enough. For us, remarketing possibilities is only in boundaries of Georgia. So we are very much limited. And in this situation, I think that it will be very hard for us to somehow survive and so on. And can you suggest, I don't know, maybe it's a quite silly question, but can you suggest some markets that can be considered for countries like us, like Caucasian countries like Turkey or, I don't know, Azerbaijan and so on, where these countries can find alternative markets? Because for sure we cannot export anything in Europe. I mean, nobody buys from us in Europe, but maybe African countries or, I don't know, Asian countries, you may suggest, or maybe you know some kind of potential markets for us to consider in terms of remarketing. Thank you.
Well, George, thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me tell you that Georgia, your Georgia is in my heart, in my mind. It's not like the old song. I had the privilege of working with your country and with your authorities in.
We met actually. Yes, we met.
That's right.
2 years ago. Yeah.
And here's one thing that I think is interesting, which is. And I will enlist, by the way, the reinforcement by Ian and Juan Dots, if you can also habilitate the microphone to Juan, because there are a couple of things that are interesting here. Your first question is about whether or not you can find a secondary market within the country, or if you need to look elsewhere. And I would suggest that eventually you explore a little bit the opportunities within the country. It has been our experience in other emerging markets doing that. You know, the car riding system, for example, the Ubers of the world and the Lyft of the world, they have changed very much the way as people get access to vehicles, and of course they have changed the shape of supply and demand. We have seen in many countries, for example, in Latin America, that young students, they are in college or the university, and they need to generate some money. So they tend to try to lease cars to become part of the Uber drivers. And you could see that when we talk about the merchant discount system, one of the way as financing has been organized for these students that don't have, of course, very much collateral to offer, different from the vehicle itself, is that Uber can pledge the revenues to pay for the lease. And using these collateral registry laws, the secure transactions laws, you can really enforce this kind of security. If you don't have that, there are some other structures that you can use, like a trust or something like that, that can provide the possibility that all the revenues coming from Uber are going to pay first for the lease and then give the cash money that this student is looking for. We have seen that model. Of course, it was a pre-COVID-19 model when people used the service very much. But that has created, you know, within your country, the possibility to have a secondary market. Certainly, if you look to other countries in Africa, there is demand, but you need to consider that there is a lot of competition, of course, in used cars coming from the Middle East, especially from the United Arab Emirates and so on. Something that probably Ali could be a good witness of that, or Edna, okay, which is also with us.
So, interrupt, sorry, just also machinery, because our repossessed assets are, I mean, most part of it is machinery. I mean, construction equipment and mainly construction equipment and trucks and trailers and so on.
Okay, in that connection, probably here, probably Jan and Juan can help me a little bit with your practical experience in asset management.
I'll try and fill it, if I may, Rafael. I mean, in these very seconds and moments, I wouldn't say, you know, that's the end customer market that you should consider. But there are some interesting players who are accepting, let's say, yellow metal hard assets, like you're describing, and they actually provide a fulfillment service around the world. So essentially, they are taking assets from, you know, from any source, but particularly from leasing companies, either at end of lease or from default. And they have a network of customers worldwide, and they provide the fulfillment services. So that type of organization could be of interest for yourselves. And clearly these guys, you know, have a massive global database of contacts, and, you know, can't guarantee that they'll move product quickly, but it's something certainly to consider. I would also echo the general point that Rafael was making. You know, local redeployment is usually better even in developed markets, but clearly if it's saturated and the construction industry locally is struggling, then you would need to look outside and look beyond. But the likes of the company I was referring to earlier, I would suggest might be an interesting avenue to pursue.
Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead with the questions. We have at this point 10 open questions and approx 30 minutes. So we're going to have to go quickly over them. The first one is, okay, give me a second. What are the positive and negative points for this confinement in the leasing sector?
That's a very good question. Well, I would say positive points for this confinement is, as we indicated before, we learn the merits of digital transformation. We learned that we could get advantage of technology to be more efficient. This is a positive point. The second positive point is that it also waking up a sleeping giant of the lack of attention we are paying to leadership and to the talents that are embedded into our employees. We have neglected them. We have not paid attention to them. We are the responsible for not having them really engaged and committed to their work. So we should turn out the statistics, not being 13 out of 100 really committed employees. We should have 100 out of 100 really committed employees, and that adds to us. That's a positive point that we learned that. And fortunately, there are the tools to make that important change. What are the negative points? Certainly what is happening with the economy at large. We are going to have losses. There is no doubt about it. We are going to lose money with some clients that are not going to survive the crisis and the post-crisis. So this is going to be part of the negative point there. How heavy that losses can give us an impact to our business is yet to see. That's the reason why we need to take some measures, preserve cash, trying to keep very, very strong, keep our key relationship close to us, including the potential equity investors that we may need to help us survive in the future. So this is one of the things that we need to take into consideration for the negative side. Yeah, I don't know if Ali or Ian would like to add something.
Yeah, sorry, Rafael, I didn't mean to cut across you. I just would echo what you were saying, but also add that negative you just described can be seen as a positive for the better run organizations and the more creative. You should see margins increase because the competition in the leasing industry itself, you would anticipate, will decline. Some people who in all sorts of different markets around the world have been taking very aggressive stances on credit decisioning and very thin, unsustainable margins, these types of companies are going to be the particular losers. I take the general broad point, Rafael, that you make, that it's not great for the industry at large, but the better companies always emerge if they're out of these crises potentially stronger, and particularly if they take the right measures in the current moments. And I think it is an opportunity for the industry at large to show its value to the economy. It is such a key part of the real economy, and that there is an opportunity, particularly if the industry steps up in a controlled fashion and is able to unlock value for clients in this particular moment. I think there's a great potential for leasing penetration in the long run to step up.
Yeah. Just to add to what Ian was saying, I believe that the ones who are the most capable, to adapt and adjust their approach, will be the one who will be winning in this game. So it means that the market will actually keep the best of the players. When it comes to Africa, and with regards to the equipment that will be leased in the continent, what is for sure is that in many countries, the current situation is that the market for new equipment is not very developed in most of the countries. So it means that there is an opportunity for countries like the one that was mentioned, where there is an offer in terms of used second-hand equipment. And the way probably to market better that equipment is to create some platforms that will be known from the lessors and potential lessees, in order for them to know that there is some equipment available in Georgia, somewhere else, and and to have access to the maximum of information regarding the quality of that equipment, and to also be able actually to even have a kind of evaluation that is done before even shipping the equipment on its quality, on its shape, etc. So there is a way probably because in Africa what will happen if they are the last that will have access to the new equipment that are sold by the one who produced these equipment. So they will have no option but to look for at least a way to get some equipment in a way or another. And the second-hand equipment is most suitable for this type of market.
Thank you so much. I will continue with a question from Mr. Rupesh Maikar. In comparison of 2008-2009 crisis, the current global crisis will result in more defaults and return equipment. This will result in requirement of large warehousing spaces and the cost. Asset inventory that may or may not build, which is anticipated after lockdown. Even remarketing partners will not be able to redeploy our assets anytime soon this time. So basis on this, how much hit, haircuts, write-offs should we expect this time? Approximately. And is there any new solutions or any idea to deal with current or estimated situation?
Okay, so let me suggest this. Well, number one, I think that we have two experts with us. One is Ian, and the other one is Juan Dodds. We haven't given Juan the opportunity to share his experience in the field many years ago, because he had the practical experience in a downturn, which was very critical at the beginning of the year 2000, 2001. So probably, Juan, you can give us some illustration about this question and probably a little bit about the former one. So okay. if you want.
Well, probably first, I think that one of the main difficulties we will find in remarketing equipment is that this is a global hit. So sending potential equipment from one country to other one to trying to access international markets is we are going to face a depressed market all over the world. But some countries will recover more quickly than others, no? So, well, that can give you a roadmap, but it's not going to be a shortcut. It's on the long run, the market will recover, but not in the short term. So I would say today is I think the most important rule is customer retention, and to take a close look at your customer who is going to survive. If you think that the customer is sound, yes, restructure the contracts, try to avoid repossessions, because that would add you costs, warehousing costs, and equipment in stock also deteriorates. So and to be able to sell it, you have to have that equipment in working conditions. So try to restructure. Restructuring contracts would be, I would say, the rule, and repossessing would be the exception. Also, close contact to your customer. When you don't consider your customer a delinquent or default customer, he's suffering. So potentially, if you have to repossess, take a look at repossessing part of the equipment and not all, because that might serve both ways, you and your customer, and would give you a better relationship in the future with them. I would say that is how I remember we had to restructure more than 2,000 contracts with customers. So the idea is try to keep those assets as revenue generating assets and not repossess assets in stock. The other thing is rent. When remarketing equipment is difficult, try to develop renting channels, because that would give you some. You turn that repossessed assets into revenue generating assets, and you avoid having to write off those assets from your. I don't know, Ian, if you have something to.
No, Juan, you made excellent points already. I think maybe the only other point to make, clearly this is sector dependent and asset dependent. There will be sectors that come back faster than others. That's clear. So having a good perspective on that, and clearly understanding the value that you achieve today versus what you might achieve if you're unable to, as Juan suggested, it is really a good strategy if you can to get into a short-term or even medium-term rental solution with returned assets. So try and get them working to start with. If you have a large exposure to, say, an existing rental sector, as companies I've worked with and for in the past have, and literally it means you just flooded with equipment and there really isn't a market, and the costs of logistics don't make sense, and to your point, Juan, that it's likely that that it's probable that there won't be hot markets very quickly that make sense to ship very long distances, but you might get better prices than liquidating locally. A hold strategy might make sense. Businesses I've worked in, we've looked at the cost of taking some facilities and storing. And there are material costs of insurance and the facilities themselves. So you need to go in with your eyes open, and it's a calculated assessment of what might happen in the future. And again, there's no guarantees on that, but a very clear-eyed, rational analysis of potential outcomes is as good as you can do in these circumstances, I would suggest.
In the same line, we have a question also for assets from Mr. Muhammad Ahmad. What's your views about customers asking moratorium for 3 to 6 months to funders and same time asking for new funding, especially sale and leaseback of existing assets? What's your advice to funder in terms of taking extra measures?
Well, let me take that one. I think that this goes in a little bit in the same line that Juan mentioned, which is, well, number one, we need to do business. So my suggestion there is, first of all, evaluate very carefully, if you have not done so in the past, but evaluate very carefully the character of these customers. Because in our experience, the customers with good character, they always pay. Even against the terrible hardship they might face, their moral structure force them to pay, even though it could be late, but they always will pay. Never you will have a charge-off with good character customers. So that's the first step. The second step, of course, is try to understand the rationale of the business, because it seems a little bit contradictory, or it may not be, to look for restructure from one side, but to look for more business from the other side. But you can see that probably they are saying, okay, I need to restructure my liquidity. A way to generate liquidity is, of course, a sale and leaseback transaction. But you need to make sure that in your analysis of the capacity of the client, the funds that you are giving to them are going to generate more cash flow, more funding, as opposed to going to the drain. If the funds are, if there is not sustainable cash flow with the proceeds of the investment that they do with the money you gave to them, that probably is going to be a bad credit decision, because you are going to increase your potential casualties. And of course, even with good character customers can also die, and then good character goes away. But the thing is that you need to really assess that. Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes people is getting an opportunity that is going to generate more cash flow to them, and they need additional cash. So the way to generate cash is, number one, stop paying you the existing commitments, and number two, getting additional funding with a sale and leaseback. If it's the case, so probably we'll go ahead with this kind of solution. If it's not the case, we'd probably, the thing is just making them make clear, if they are good characters, that they are really crabbing their own tomb there. I don't know if Juan or Ian has any comment on this.
Not beyond what you covered from my side, Rafael. You covered the main points.
Okay, so let's go. Catherine, do you have any other one that is not in the question list? We go to the question about agriculture.
Yes.
Okay.
Agriculture from Mr. Bildad Bafula. Agriculture seems to be a latecomer to the digital transformation. Does that mean that traditional means of production will still be maintained even amidst the COVID pandemic and after?
I would say that this is a great question, and there are two contributions there. Number one, you may remember that we talk about an innovative approach that we can have, which is the contract farming. Contract farming is a way as you can really help the agricultural sector to get more involved into the real supply chain of food and other agricultural supplies. And the contract farming has the advantage that you can structure the deals in a way that the collateral of your investment is going to be supported, number one, by the equipment you can provide to the agricultural, which in itself can provide some enhancement in terms of technology and digital transformation. We can mention the case of the unmanned tractors that John Deere is offering to the market. You don't need anyone to drive it. It drives by itself using a computer base. But you can also provide through the contract farming and other facilities that the agricultural players using also smartphones can improve their capabilities to undertake their whole business not only in terms of production, but also in terms of marketing, distribution, and so on. Contract farming is going to be a good ally for you there. And for contract farming, what you need to do is look for a partner, like one of these large companies that distribute and buy food. I can quote the case of Nestle, one of them, but there are many other, and there are over, and even large supermarkets in the country. They can be players with whom you can partner for contract farming, and that would enhance the capabilities of the agricultural sector to provide something that is absolutely needed right now, which is food, not only in the COVID-19 time, but after the COVID-19 time.
I have here one that applies to everybody. It's Mr. Joseph Umoru. How can the leasing industry stay afloat during this period of the pandemic, where there will be an increase in default payment of rentals and high cost of asset acquisition as it affects the leasing business?
Well, I would say that, yes, that's a very good question, because you are right. I mean, we are going to have, in the post-crisis, probably the cost of assets are going to be higher. And probably that is going to also affect the equation between the productivity of the equipment and the cost of the leases for the lessees. That is certainly a very challenging issue. We may probably need to be more creative in terms of understanding better the business of our clients from one side. From the other side, we need also to reinforce our capabilities in asset management, because at times we may undertake business strategies such as transforming our business from a long-term leasing basis based on a hell or high water clause over 36 months to having several rental agreements using the same kind of equipment. If we are comfortable and we have developed our capabilities in asset management, we can probably cope with the challenges that they impact. And certainly with the defaults, as Juan and Ian have suggested, we need to be very proactive and creative in terms of the workouts and the restructuring with the clients. And again, the key measure there is to select the clients that have good character and with whom you can work in a realistic way to see how you can navigate not only the crisis, but the post-crisis in terms of the capabilities to generate cash flows. But we are going to need to be more creative, thinking in alternatives like the short-term rentals and so on, and a lot of development of our asset management capabilities if we want that the leasing business needs to survive or our leasing business needs to survive as we want. That will be my suggestion. I don't know if Juan or Jan have something to tell, or Ali on the point.
Well, just I think that digital transformation is like the first slide you showed, Rafael. Digital transformation and managed services are going to take a special place in the mind of users of equipment, because a lot of people will try to increase the reserve of cash, and potentially buying equipment might be a challenge at these days, and so renting and signing solutions contracts would probably be the way to enter the market, a changed market.
Absolutely.
We have a question in regard to cash from Mr. Bilal Dar. Ships are safe in the harbor, but that is not the place they should be. So how holding money in the form of cash will be a good option?
That's a very good point. I think that what we are suggesting in terms of cash is king is that you need to have enough cash reserves to manage your business and to afford the potential loss in further cash revenues that will be related to the defaults that you are going to expect to the crisis. That's basically the meaning, but you are absolutely right. is not keeping the cash at dock with the as the ship in the port, but also being able to redeploy this cash wisely and in a way that that your investment can generate additional cash flow. That's where you need to be very insightful. Need to take a look of what are the critical industries where cash flow is going to be generated. We can anticipate, and that's the reason why we have the Maslow pyramid in place. We can anticipate that we are deploying, if you are deploying in these industries that seem to be generating more cash flows, like you know, the grocery sellers, the delivery services that are currently acting and generating cash flow. If you redeploy the cash there, you are going to receive your cash flow back. But you are absolutely right. I mean, it's not having the cash part. It's just being able to bring more cash to your bank account.
I'm going with a question from Mr. Jacava. Are there disappearances practices in the EU? I mean, when lessor cannot find the asset to repossess, and what are the strategies for this?
Yeah, and that's for you.
Yeah, Rafael, I have to apologize. I've got to jump onto a client call.
Okay. So let me then take that lead. Basically,
or potentially, if I might, approach your vendor, because someone that has taken away or is the equipment is because he's interested in the equipment. No, he needs the equipment to operate, so he will probably need spares or consumables for the equipment. If you don't have a tracking device on it, well, there are people also that are specialized in repossessions and looking for equipment. But I would say the first is try to ally with your vendor, so that if that equipment needs spares or maintenance, you are alerted.
Mm-hmm.
We have one from an anonymous attendee. Should the client be allowed to pay full monthly rental, especially where force majeure is clearly stated in the contract?
Okay, this is, let's say, a legal question, and let me rephrase a little bit the point. We will find the force majeure issue when the client wants to justify why they are defaulting. And here we have two situations. One is certain customers that say, yes, we are facing this pandemic, but I'm keep making my best efforts to keep current under my leasing agreement. And that has to do a lot with character. In some other cases, for obvious reasons, their capacity that don't allow them to keep current and keep paying. So in that case, they will use the force majeure excuse that, as I mentioned before, has different outcomes depending on the legal system where you are. If you are in an Islamic country, most probably the force majeure exception is going to be helpful, but the effect that is going to generate is not that this is going to release you from the obligation, or not release the lessee from the obligation to pay. Is going to release, not to release, but just to suspend payments until the crisis is over. So that will be the treatment that you are going to receive in an Islamic country if it is based on Islamic law, your contract. If you are in a civil law country, a Francophone country, for example, certainly the statute will favor the lessee in terms of saying, yes, the pandemic is force majeure, so you are excused to pay, but you are excused to pay the accrual rentals, but not necessarily to terminate the agreement. So this is going to be a room for discussion, and unfortunately the force majeure discussion comes in a court scenario. So, and that implies that certainly for the lessors is going to be a very, very unpleasant situation, because you will be litigating with the customer that is using the force majeure as an argument. For that reason, I mean, the best way to try to avoid these issues, if you have that conversation with the customer of force majeure, is, again, assessing their character and saying, okay, we understand your pain, we understand the effect of the pandemic, let's sit down and see how we can restructure your contract. But our suggestion is do that only with good character customers, because if you spend your time restructuring someone that is not a good character, the argument of force majeure is going to come in the next rental that is become due.
And continuing with the credit risk, Mr. Ramasubramanian has a question. Do you expect credit risk evaluation changing to innovative methods post the COVID-19 scenario?
Yes, we do. I think that one of the lessons that we should learn from COVID-19 is that we need to apply better practices in credit risk evaluation. We need to develop a more sophisticated credit scoring system in order to appraise character. We need to calculate in a more efficient way the probability of default and the loss given default of each client. Unfortunately, we have found in many of our clients in emerging markets that they don't apply these good practices. Is the time to apply good practices in this field, and this must teach us the lesson. In addition to that, which is something very important, is that the black swan situation that we are living today must also drive policies and processes within our companies to be prepared for unforeseen events. I think that that's something that we must learn from this crisis, and that's certainly credit risk management needs to change as it used to be in the past.
Thank you so much. We have basically, I don't know, one more is coming in because we're running out of time. From Mr. Kaliev, we have, is there any anticipation for how long the recovery period it takes?
Well, that's a very difficult question, and you can have two answers. If you ask Donald Trump, he will tell you that that should be tomorrow. He has all the power of the world to remove that. And of course, this is not a scientific answer. You have the other extreme, which is asking Bill Gates, and Bill Gates will tell you the recovery period is going to take as soon as we get the vaccine in place, which means everyone is going to be vaccinated. There is no remaining risk of the COVID-19 to disrupt economic activities. And then you have the truth is in the middle between the two of them. Certainly, we will need to learn how to live with the COVID-19 once the curve is flattening. An educated guess of that will be, for me, between September and November this year, to think that we will start back in business. Good proxy of that is what is happening in China. China is getting back into business. After they could manage the COVID-19 crisis in Wuhan, and they really contain the pandemic in an almost effective way. Although I received news yesterday that there were some new cases coming from Russia to China. So it's a different question to be answered, but everything we are saying is an educated guess. The truth is between what Mr. Trump thinks and what Mr. Bill Gates thinks.
From Mr. Mohammed Elab, we have, companies working in equipment business may react to COVID-19 crisis by reducing manpower by 10 or 20%. May I ask what the right time or a stage for company to proceed with that, keeping in mind that COVID-19 is not exactly like 2008 crisis, and you will need to be ready when business is back?
Well, that's a very, very good question, and it has to do a lot with what we talk about leadership and the capability for you to unveil the talent of your employees. This is the right time for you to unveil the talent of your employees, and based on what you can do there, you can define who are fit to continue in the business and who's not. Hopefully, you should be able to keep everyone fit to be with you in the business, because it's also a matter of humanity, if you want. And I'm pretty sure that if you find out what are the real talents of your people, they are going to be productive for you after the crisis. So it will be a good investment keeping them there. Now, if finally you get into the conclusion that it's absolutely impossible to keep certain employees, well, unfortunately, you need to cut. And as we said at the beginning, you need to cut very fast. That will be painful, but it's a business decision and you need to make it.
Our last question is from Mr. Bilal Dar. Visiting the customer is critical. However, in current situation, we are unable to visit the customer. Could you please suggest any alternative?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, what we have learned in this crisis is that telecommunication, this video conference system, we have hidden our faces so far because we didn't activate the video. But we are conducting a lot of our meetings with our clients using video from both sides. You are able then to read the body language of the people. And as we mentioned before, there is already a technology available for inspecting the assets and geolocating the assets. So the need for the personal visit can be overridden if you can manage a communication using videos like this, and if you can have remote technology tools that can help you to track your assets. These are the two key advantages that you have when you pay customer visits.
That would be all our questions for today.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. We apologize because it took more time, but that shows also that you were interested in the subject of this webinar. Needless to mention, we are at your complete disposal. And Catherine has already connection with all of you. We have your email addresses. This material is going to be distributed. The recording is going to be also deployed in YouTube, available for everyone. And we will be very happy to count with your participation in our future events and get in touch with you for whatever need you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. And anything that you would like, please contact me. You can also keep on pace with the ultrawebinars.com, where we have listed the different webinars that we have over the following days. Thank you.